Oh, you know what that means. Welcome back to the institution of higher learning. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah.
So this is one of those topics that you learn about in school, but it's just kind of like a passing mention. And you never really question it because you're already on the next topic and you're bored of shit in history class because they are boring. They don't get into it like we do. And this is a topic that I didn't know I wanted to know so much about.
It's a lot of juice to this orange, for sure.
And it's literally a world-shaping event that takes place here. That man over there on my left, he's the Bill to my Ted. He's the Chance to my Shadow. It's a Homeward Bound reference.
Yeah.
I put myself in the older dog's role there. This guy's the Carl Spackler to my Ty Webb. It's Professor Adam, ladies and gentlemen. Buddy, what happens if this event does not occur?
I think we're host. I think the United States is legitimately screwed, and they wouldn't be the same world power I don't know why I say that we are today. I'd like to take credit for that part of the world.
We like
power.
to think ourselves of international citizens. I mean, we feel more worldly now having done this podcast.
Yeah, but at the same time, the neighbor situation for the United States is luck. I mean, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. The United States is pretty good, but at the same time, I think luck sort of wins out with our situation.
From everything we've talked about, like so many civilizations and countries getting invaded and taken over, we somehow were able to, and I'm not saying this, that we took it over correctly or anything like that, because it's never really done that way, but somehow to get into a position where we have an ocean for defense on two sides of us, a neighbor that just wants to chill above us, and then a neighbor below us that just wants to party, but it's like, hey, we'll just keep it down here. And everyone gets along. We don't have to worry about being invaded, versus countless times that we've talked about stuff in Europe that you have neighbors on like four sides of you, unless you're Britain, and that's why they were able to stay that way. But yeah, someone's always pissed off knocking at the door and conquering you. And very realistically, had this event not occurred that we're going to be discussing, we could have had a neighbor from another country, another colony, like literally hemming us in from the Mississippi to the East Coast.
Really the only weird situation we have to worry about here is Quebec and Quebec City, and it's like one patch, I think, of Canada that's still really clawingly French.
Old French Canadian.
Yeah.
And I never really understood what that meant.
Well, it was just like the last part of France that was sort of settled, I think, by the French, and it just kind of grew into Canada. And we'll talk about why they lost essentially the rest of Canada at one point. But there's just so much extra to this where it's luck that we are where we are. There's a reason why we don't fight wars on U.S. soil anymore, or try not to at least, military style. But it's so much of what happened in Europe is fairly consequential to why this all happened.
Oh yeah, the dominoes that had to all kind of be falling at the same time to make this possible. It like you said, it's an extreme stroke of luck that this actually got pulled together. You guys have been fantastic with the replies and the responses and the feedback that you've given to us. Keep it up.
Love it.
5 stars whenever you guys can spare them. We love getting them. We love doing these episodes for you. And why don't we get into Louisiana Purchase?
Saddle up.
Sir, explain to me how the French even owned a huge chunk of land in our backyard.
Yeah, first off, just shooting from the hip. Since this is Louisiana Purchase, we're going to be talking a lot about New Orleans. What's the most logical way that the French would have ended up in New Orleans?
they would have sailed around into the Gulf of Mexico because weren't they already in areas in the Caribbean?
Yeah.
So, and New Orleans being right there in the Gulf of Mexico, yeah, obviously they sailed into New Orleans, right?
Couldn't have been the exact opposite way. Still kind of sailed over there to get there. In 1534, there was a navigator named Jacques Cartier, and
Sacre bleu.
he claimed the northern section of North America for France. He named the area around the St. Lawrence River and St. Lawrence Bay, New France. We don't get a whole lot of
Francais or something like that.
Yeah, there was no Nouveau France, something, but it's not like we can't figure something else out. Like if France is so cool and we found this, we're just going to call this France too.
Yeah.
Or you think it's like an ownership thing.
France do.
Just so when you hear it, you just know who owns it.
I guess
it's
so.
New France.
Well, I was just mentioning this to you. When you're thinking about like the name, like what the places are named after, think of New Orleans. So New Orleans, however you want to pronounce it. So over in France, there's an Orleans. So you name it New whatever. Same thing with like New Hampshire. There's a Hampshire in Britain. New Mexico. It's just named after the country.
I didn't even think of that
one. Yeah. But like, so if you're really thinking about these locations think of a place like in Missouri, St. Louis, Louisiana, and St. Louis are named after King Louis, the King of France, when these places were actually claimed by the French.
What, Louis the 16th, I think? Is that right?
14th, 15th, 16th.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
A hell of a lot of them.
It's a lot like the, is it James? Yeah, it's the Jameses. And it's Louis in France, it's Jameses in Great Britain.
France coming in the way that they did, the reason they were able to get so goddamn deep inside of the northern part of North America was they found the passage to go down the river, they found the river to get to the lake, they found the lake to get to the lake, and they end up coming upon this whole area where they end up finding the Great Lakes, because those waterways that carried so much out of our country to go for trade, that was just how they found their way into Canada.
So they find their way into what's now known as Nova Scotia.
Yep.
Nova Scotia, then find the St. Lawrence River Valley. For people that don't know the St. Lawrence River Valley, there is actually a waterway that can connect in several different methods upriver, like several different branches. But from the East Coast, Nova Scotia, to the Great Lakes.
It's crazy.
I know. So as they're moving up further and everything, they're establishing these, little colonies and little settlements for French citizens that are coming over there and finding their way into the Great Lakes, then traversing the Great Lakes, coming down into Illinois, that type of area. And then from Illinois, I think the distance at closest point was 350 miles between the Great Lakes, like where Chicago would be, where it'd meet it, and the Missouri River. You then find the Missouri River, and it's going to flow south. You take that down and you get to the Gulf of Mexico, and you're like, do you think the first guy down there looked around and was like, why the fuck didn't we come here first? It's so nice here. The weather's great. We started up fucking in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, pretty cold. Well, the other part is too, once this whole trip was just downriver. You're just going downriver. So you're like, well, where do you want to stop at? I don't know. We'll just go till this dumps us somewhere into the next biggest body of water. And it just seems so easy. And it's the last place I would have thought that they would have discovered New Orleans. But 1608, Samuel de Champlain founds Quebec. He starts exploring this Great Lakes region, starts exploring Hudson's Bay. He eventually finds the Mississippi, and this whole entire way...
Did I say Missouri? Mississippi River was 350 miles from the Great Lakes to the...
I think you have to hit the Missouri, and then the Missouri dumps you into the Mississippi.
Oh, okay.
I think the Missouri is the tributary that...
But it goes... Remember, the Missouri is the one that actually goes... and starts branching up. When we talked about the Lewis and Clark episode, that's the one that branches off and starts heading up northwest. So I don't think it comes all the way back over to Illinois. I'm looking this up.
Okay. And along the way, they're establishing these French trade alliances with all these Native American tribes, the Algonquins, the Huron tribes, and you also have other unfriendly Native American tribes like the Iroquois that come back around to go after the French, I believe, here coming up pretty soon for about 7 years. 1673, there is a French expedition led by a Jesuit missionary, Jacques Marquette. Marquette, I think there's a Marquette in Michigan. There's a college named Marquette. More French connection there. And fur trapper Louise Joliet. They start down the Mississippi River. Joliet, Illinois. Can't imagine it's named anything besides that for that.
So the Mississippi, how we didn't have this already pulled up. Sorry, guys. New Orleans, and then pretty much goes north up, pretty straight north, and it actually goes up. That's why Illinois, that side of it is all like bumpy when you're looking at it from geographic. It's because that's how the Mississippi River flows. St. Louis, that's where it branches off between the Mississippi and the Missouri.
Okay.
Yeah. But apparently there's like actually a few rivers that go from the Great Lakes down into the Mississippi. So it was an easy connection. They're just like, fucking river. We're just going to head down into this bigger river.
You have literally nothing but time to explore all these rivers to try to figure out where they go. 1682, Rene Robert Calvier canoes down the lower Mississippi from the Illinois River all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. So this is a straight shot. Gets down there April 9th, 1682. He claimed the Mississippi River Basin for the French, naming it La Louisiane.
After Louis. You might be asking yourself, where are the fucking British during this happening?
They're hugging the coast on the east side.
Where they can get resupplied and where they're safe. So the first actual like British settlement was as far back as 1585. Roanoke. We got to do a fucking episode on Roanoke, the Lost Colony.
Can you imagine as they were stretching out towards the west, and all of a sudden they start running into these French people like, fuck, you're over here too?
Native Americans that start speaking French.
Oh,
and they're just
where'd
like,
you learn that language?
Yeah, what is going on here? So Roanoke, Lost Colony, they tried again. 1607 is what most people know as Jamestown. So Jamestown named after one of the fucking King Jameses. That's actually established. Yeah, 1607. They in 1609, between 1609 and 1610, apparently making a settlement was not easy. 80% of the Jamestown population died of starvation and sickness. They lost 80 fucking percent.
Bad crop year, man.
Yeah. So we end up getting that as kind of the first British settlement. So they are just, like Adam said, hugging the coast. France had kind of had other, they didn't have a ton of holdings on this side of the world.
Western Hemisphere, definitely not.
Huge holdings in Africa. That's something we're going to have to talk about. But they finally were like, we got to get a piece of this because Spain has the entirety of fucking South America and also now most of Central America. We got to try to get our piece of this pie. This country that the Brits have found has got to be much larger. We're going to try to claim that. So before they really kind of got their toehold in North America, they tried in like Rio. They also tried in Florida, and I think Spain had Florida or something like that at the time.
Pretty locked up.
So France is basically in a position where they're like, this is now going to be New France. Like, this is going to be our largest colonial holding. We've got all this fucking area.
It's... I don't really know what you feel as France at that point because probably this is the longest trek to a colony that you would have. I guess some of those places down in Africa would probably be pretty tough.
Yeah.
But you have to figure out, and the other part of it is, what we get in Louisiana Purchase is what they claimed is theirs. That's a huge swath of land for a colony to have. Colonies usually work with a lot of land, which is good, but when it's just too big, it's too tough to police. It's too tough to maintain.
So we'll kind of describe what land is going to be included when we get closer to the actual purchase itself, but looking at it, I don't know why my mind didn't click. The pattern of it just basically spreads out up the Mississippi and then follows the Missouri River.
Yeah.
And that's what it does because that's where they obviously went up and were exploring before Lewis and Clark were up there.
It's sort of Louisiana shaped.
Yeah.
A little bit.
A little bit. I finally figured out what point I was trying to make about the separation, how the British didn't know. They were all the way near the Mississippi River. You still have a huge swath of land between the East Coast and the Mississippi. So they really didn't even know the French were doing anything and had no idea that they had found or discovered Louisiana and then New Orleans.
And New Orleans was a big, big get for them. It's founded 1718. It was named for the Duke of Orleans, of course. And that's where we get La Nouvelle Orleans. From 1756 to 1763, there's this little thing called the 7 Years' War, French and Indian War. It's fought between France and Great Britain and a bunch of other side characters that make this whole thing very, very interesting.
Okay, so what we've got here during the 7 Years' War, it's going to get its own episode, but just kind of paint the picture. You have two countries where their motherland are squaring off over in Europe. Mm-hmm. You then have those same two countries that have somehow find themselves next to each other in a completely new continent.
Except this time, the Brits are on the east side and the French are on the west side instead of vice versa.
It's north
in
and
Europe.
south, basically. They're like, we're used to fighting north and south, not east and west. And you have this going on in Europe, so you have an active war going on between the bulk of their forces being kept, in their home territories. And then you have this other war that's going on that's not really like going to be trading a lot of land, but you have the French who have established these relationships with like the Indians in the area and everything. So that's why it's called, for us, as in the United States, we call it the French and Indian War, because it was against kind of a mishmash of like both French and Indian soldiers.
Yeah, and the Iroquois, I believe, were the main antagonists as the Native American tribe. I think the Iroquois actually fought on the side with Great Britain, which is a real dirty, dirty thing in the rest of history.
So, coming toward the end of this 7 Years' War, 1962 rolls around and France kind of
1762.
Oh, sorry, 17. Yeah, Jesus, not 19. 1762 comes around and France is like, it's not looking good for us. I don't think we're going to win this war. What can we do? Because if we lose this war, they're going to go ahead and take something. And since they're not going to come over here and take a portion of France, they're going to take other areas that we have. And they happen to be right next to this insanely large area where we have this very successful port. One of the largest, I think, actually.
Most trafficked, for sure.
Yeah. Coming in to, get all of these goods traded into the Americas. They're going to fucking take that shit. How do we keep them from taking that? Well, why don't we just give it to somebody else that's cool with us and then be like, oh man, you can't repo that. Like, I don't own it anymore.
Yeah,
I sold
not
that.
ours.
So right before the end of the war in 1763, France gives the territory to Spain in a treaty called the Treaty of Fontainebleau. And basically after they surrender, capitulate, whatever, to England, hands up and being like, they're like, all right, we want that territory in North America. And they're like, sorry, like, we don't have it. Like, Spain has it. Like, Spain made us a deal and we had to take advantage of it. So you got to talk to them, but you weren't at war with them, so you really can't take anything from them.
Well, and they did make a few concessions to Great Britain. They basically said, okay, everything east of the Mississippi can be yours.
And stuff
we
got
won't
established.
contest anything east of the Mississippi.
Yeah, and they probably had certain established areas east of the Mississippi because you're going to spread out on both sides of that river on each side. But what was the bulk of the area?
Well, and you're not giving up New Orleans. You're not giving up the port. You're also not giving up control of the Mississippi River, which is how all these things need to travel.
And what is, you just gave that to, at this point, the British, who then now have this territory that borders on this Mississippi River. They're going to be looking for all of that area because you get to a certain point, like in the Appalachian Mountains, where it's much easier on one side to go and take all of your goods to the Mississippi and then shuttle them down to the Gulf of Mexico than it would be to try to get to the East Coast to get your goods on ships going, out of Boston and New York and all that kind of shit.
So we'll charge your balls off to take it down the Mississippi.
Yeah, since we still control the Mississippi and also the one place at the end of the river where everything needs to either be held or brought into port and everything. Because what are you going to do? Sell all your goods up and just unload it on your side? No, New Orleans was a place that was necessary for the operation of that entire region.
Yeah, it had to be kept. And the sneaky Shell Corporation move of ceding it over to Spain is kind of interesting because this takes place at a time when Spain is sort of reeling. They have all these land holdings still, but I believe the Spanish Armada is gone. I think they've already been sunk, which was the
Gone are the days of the Spanish Armada.
yeah, the biggest part of the power of Spain was this armada. And so you start to kind of see where Spain may be a little less aggressive on a national front or on a world front, I guess.
Not willing to step in and really take sides, being like, no, you guys just hash this out.
Yeah, but you do seem to be fairly good at monitoring some land, so why don't we just send this over to you guys?
I see down in South America, you guys have been pretty good about, killing everybody and managing the land. Would you guys like to go ahead and just kind of watch over this piece of land we have in North America? Just maybe don't murder as many people or whatever.
Well, they still have New Mexico, Texas, everywhere that Spain owned that Mexico took when they declared their independence. So you're butted up almost right next to Louisiana, and actually right next to Louisiana. So what is it for you guys to go monitor this?
And also, as part of this treaty, you just keep letting us do what we've been doing this entire time with the shipping of all our goods and all that stuff in control of the Mississippi River.
It all just seemed like it was a decent transition, but Spain didn't have a real big interest in controlling this too much as far as like they put leaders in there, but they weren't like wholeheartedly controlling all the way up the Mississippi River. It was kind of a hit and miss deal. They really didn't get into it until they found out that they could just start taxing the hell out of everybody that came through the port of New Orleans. And then as soon as they figured that out, they were in. And some of those Spanish leaders that were like governor of the port of New Orleans made a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
Like some of the richest dudes in the world at the time were involved in the port of New Orleans.
Okay, so stuff actually moves pretty fast when it comes to America going out on its own. So 1762, Treaty of Fontainebleau, end of the 7-Year War between England and France. 1763, all of a sudden, 1776 rolls around, baby. USA is born. Essentially, we had just got done fighting the French and on the side of Britain, and now all of a sudden, during the American Revolution, because we have a French presence there in New Orleans and everything, they have an investment that they have to protect, because I guarantee you if they would have beat, the United States during the American Revolution, they're not letting the French keep New Orleans. They're taking the whole thing.
Well, Spain at that point.
Yeah, correct. But France wanted to go and protect their investment because when they gave that treaty over there, it was basically them just being like, hold this shit for me, man. That's what it was. It was passing off the fucking drugs. Being like, hold this shit for me for a sec.
Yeah, I could see it that way.
Especially remember when we did Napoleon? Napoleon puts into power when he's, before he was emperor, he was, what was he? Not chancellor.
He was the leader of the army.
He was, but he was able to position people into power. And remember how he put like his brother-in-law or something on the seat of power in Spain?
Yeah.
So it wasn't even
not King George. Yeah.
But it was an easy deal for him. I'm trying to remember how early that happened, but had he just been like, hey, you're going to go ahead and hold on to this territory for me. Cool, man.
I think it was a ways before that, though, because we run up to 1789, which is when the French Revolution kicks off. So Napoleon would have come to power like in the late 1790s. And since this happened 1762, 1763, they're still dealing with the French government prior to the revolution. And that's a pretty big deal for the French to go through this revolution. I think they came over and helped the United States because they were still pissed off about the 7 Years' War and just literally all the other wars that had gone on between these two for the age of Scott. We talked about a million different in the monarchy episode. Literally, they just fought France every 5 years. It felt like for like 300 years.
Fucking neighbors just couldn't fucking get along.
Yeah, just the worst neighbors ever. So I have no problem believing that the French, even though they weren't really invested in the Western Hemisphere anymore, were like, we're going to stick this to the British. We want to see the British splinter because then they just get weaker.
I could see it being a position too of where like that like they're having to split their forces. They're gonna have to pull people in to try to fight here if we have a French presence here. So it's gonna pull their strength away even more. So their ships are they're gonna have less ships.
If we need to backdoor them, they're gonna be weaker at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, it all is very kind of interesting how it just wars make strange bedfellows between us, France, and Great Britain over time. After the French Revolution kicks off, so interesting how we get the American Revolution, then the French Revolution. There's a good chance that they maybe saw a little bit of what kings looked like when the United States had their revolution, so maybe it helped France a little bit. France
or also Britain's weak.
Yeah.
Weaker.
France then shoots themselves in the foot by the revolution because there is a little French colony that is the linchpin in this whole entire episode. Saint Domingue is the sole reason that the Louisiana Purchase happened. And this revolt, you're going to understand what we're talking about here in a little bit when we get to what its name is now. But from 1791 to 1804, there was a revolution in this French colony on Saint Domingue. I believe, I'm going to fuck this one up because it's one or the other. It's a 50-50. I'm going to get it wrong. Saint Domingue is the Haiti side of the connection of Haiti and Puerto Rico. Or the Dominican Republic.
Yeah, Dominican Republic.
Okay, Dominican Republic. Got it wrong the first time. I knew I was going to. But this was a huge, huge colony for France financially. I want to say that at one point this was like a quarter of France's actual money that they made from the colonies.
Yeah, it was a ton of it was like a sugarcane plantation and it grew some other stuff, but it was nothing but a fucking moneymaker. And it was a source not only of slave labor, but it was run on the cheap because it was fucking slave labor.
And these are the people that gave us voodoo. Pretty cool. I'm sure that it got back to the colony that there was a revolution in France. And the way, preface, going to talk about slavery, probably not a lot of emotion in it just because it's just such a fact of time back then.
We've also been a little bit numb to certain things,
Yeah.
having to study sermon. So it's not a lack of we don't understand it or anything, but it's just it's just getting through the information.
Yeah. French slavery, different from American slavery. French slavery, there was actually a chance for these slaves to buy their freedom. So on this little Saint Domingue island, you have these slave class, the plantation owner class, and then you sort of have this middle class where there are free African Americans that are able to work in and amongst the city on the island. And
Didn't some of them actually have slaves too?
Yes, some of them also actually have slaves too, which kind of makes things tough. And it also is something that we'll talk about when Spain is running Louisiana. But you get these guys who start to talk of rebellion. And I don't know how. I don't know why. I'm assuming it was probably because they were all fighting for their lives. But this revolt was very, very good militarily, and it was led by this self-educated former slave. His name was Toussaint Louverture.
Wasn't he like a general?
He was a general of the Haitian army.
Oh, okay.
Their Saint Domingue Rebellion army.
I just saw the picture of him, and he looks like a French officer because of the hat he's wearing and everything like that.
They had no other style.
He
from
took
there.
it off a dead French officer, and he's like, mine now.
Yeah. The best thing that they had on their side, besides being very, very good militarily, is they outnumbered plantation owners and white people on the island 4-1.
Yeah.
When you finally realize that you have strength in numbers, and we've always talked about in any war, usually the side that has more to lose than the other side had more people to lose will end up eventually grinding down the other forces.
It's not even that, too, in this situation. They're on their home turf. They're in an area that it takes acclimating to.
Oh, yeah.
That those people that have come in there and still the plantation owners and the French soldiers, those are just the ones that have survived, the tropical diseases, and now they're acclimated. You can't just bring in, we're going to find out what happens when you try to bring in a bunch of reinforcements. But yeah, I mean, they definitely have the numbers advantage, and they also, that's their home. That's been their home since fucking before the French came and did this shit to them. So I think that's definitely why, they had that sense to fight even stronger.
Yeah. So Napoleon sweeps into office. He's the consul, whatever you want to call him, the dictator, the ruler.
Emperor, I think.
Emperor, yes, that's the right word. And he looks at his brother-in-law, Charles Leclerc, and he goes, hey, Saint Domingue is going to play a pretty big role in what we want to do in the Western Hemisphere. I'm going to need you to go down there and shut out that rebellion. When Charles Leclerc gets down there, the French do some pretty fucking rough stuff to this rebellion and to these people. One of the things that I'd heard, and I don't know if it's true or not, but it's pretty messed up. Napoleon told him to catch people and to shove gunpowder up their ass and then light the gunpowder and blow them up. That's pretty gross. Toussaint ends up getting captured, but to go along with these victories that the French are scoring, like you just said, without getting acclimated to this area, yellow fever is going to be huge. Malaria is going to be huge.
Yeah, specify that.
Like it's just a fact of life that for all the bad shit that the Spanish brought over and knocked out the South American people with, the French people aren't going to like malaria. Just like we talked about with the God damn it. The passageway, North and South America.
Oh,
Panama Canal. Yeah. All those guys down there that got yellow fever and contracted it in South America because their bodies just weren't used to it.
Yeah.
And the French start falling like crazy. I believe Leclerc actually did die of like yellow fever. But they got ground down. They ended up losing. And once they lost, Saint Domingue claimed their freedom. And they became, I believe, the first black colony to declare their independence in the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, one that had been either... I'm trying to... Because there were certain statuses that you had to receive. You could be your country. You could recognize that yourself. But there was this weird thing where you had to be recognized by other countries as a country, that they actually recognize your sovereignty and everything. So I'm sure that they were recognized by... They would have to have been recognized by somebody to get that, like, country status.
Well, in this whole entire time, too, you have the United States being just north, kind of keeping an eye on what's going on down there and hearing about the revolt. And you kind of know that there's some backwards dealing going on. You're pretty sure towards the end of this rebellion that Spain's got something coming, or Spain and France have something coming. We'll talk about that here in a second. But to kind of wrap up the Haiti story and explain something that this episode has taught me, we don't look at Haiti as a great shining country, right? Like the press on Haiti is usually a lot of corruption, a big earthquake, humanitarian crises.
Yeah, that's normally when you see Haiti, is when there's some like horrible shit going down.
Well, I believe it was in 1825. The French are still pretty sore about the rebellion, and this doesn't have anything to do with this episode. This is just very interesting. They end up coming back to Haiti with a bunch of warships, and I believe they said that they parked outside of Port-au-Prince in the bay and had like 500 cannons trained on the city as they walked into the capital. We're like, hey, we got some issues. Our pockets are a little bit sore from what you guys did to us. Our asses are too. So here's the deal. You are going to pay us an indemnity for all of the land that you took, because it was all technically ours. Even though we came in and took it from somebody else, it was ours at the time when you took it from us. And you're going to pay us for all the labor you took from us. So you're going to pay us an indemnity because you took your freedom from being a slave. We get that money back.
Do you think any of it had to do with the end of the Napoleonic Wars? They were like 10 years before, and they just start fucking running out of money because they're making reparations to fucking everybody. And they're like, okay, somebody look back, find out who we can fucking squeeze to try to get some money, even though this shit has technically, they've been independent for what? At that point, it would be almost 25, 30 years.
Long while. So, it would have been like 20 years. So, I believe the deal was 120 million gold francs that they took as indemnity to Haiti. And Haiti doesn't have 125 million gold francs laying around.
Like, we don't even fucking use francs.
Yeah, what are we going to do with this? So the bank that they actually were forced to use was a French bank to get this loan paid.
Mm-hmm.
And so the French bankers were making money paying the French government, and they were all collecting an interest rate on this. It took up until 1911, I would say, for them to pay off their debt, but it didn't, because in 1911, the United States, who directly benefited from them getting their freedom, goes ahead and buys the Haitian treasury so they can start collecting the interest rates on the payment. In 1922, they end up finally purchasing the Haiti's debt to France from France and finish collecting payments all the way until 1947. In modern times, I believe I saw in 2023, with what the indemnity was plus the interest that they paid, $35 billion. How in the world can a country... Oh, and at the same time, the French said, any trading that we do with you, we get half off on your tariffs. So just absolutely railroaded them. So every time you see negative press about Haiti in the news, just understand that this is a country that had to fight through a tremendous amount of money that they had to pay the French for their freedom. And then the U.S. was like, well, I'm going to wet my beak too. Pretty nuts.
We're not paying it off. We're just taking over the loan.
Yeah. So, back to yeah, dude, just crazy. 1795, back in the United States, something called Pinckney's Treaty is signed, which gives the United States the right to deposit and store goods in New Orleans and the right to navigate the entire Mississippi River.
So this is still back when, because we're jumping back a little bit, Adam was just kind of wrapping up how the Haiti thing turned out. So this is still when Spain is actually kind of the caretaker of this area. The Pinckney Treaty is basically just Spain's way of saying, like, yeah, you can use everything. We're still going to make a ton of money off you. It's good business. So that happens you said that was 1795, right?
Yes.
So 3 years of that, it's going good. Everyone's making money. It's going great. 1798, Spain revokes the treaty. So you have a whole bunch of people that have been relying on this, using this waterway, lives built out here. People have moved essentially from the East Coast because as soon as this area, was acquired by the British, everyone started spreading out toward the Mississippi. So all of a sudden you now have like your livelihood completely in jeopardy because you can't like move your goods and services and everything.
Yeah.
So it didn't last long because in 1801 there was a new governor that actually came in from Spain. He reinstates the treaty itself. And in 1800, prior to this guy reinstating this, Napoleon actually signed a secret treaty that ceded the territory back to France.
The Third Treaty of San Ildefonso.
So, treaty signed. Now, this isn't like nowadays where like someone signs a treaty and then it's like, all right, fantastic. This is effective immediately because we all signed it. The treaty had to be signed where it was actually signed between the parties, had to be witnessed, all that good shit. It then had to make its way back across the ocean or wherever to that country.
Yeah.
It then had to go through the government process of that country of ratifying and recognizing the treaty and had to do the same thing on the other side because there were two copies of it, one for each country. So there were these time lapses where a treaty is signed, but this takes until I think it was 1803 is when the actual transfer of power went back from Spain to France. Now, because at this point, the United States, we see this stuff going on down in Haiti. Essentially, we have, a French colony that's close, a staging ground, basically, that France can bring all of its troops into. They still have at this point. Now they have the territory back. This is their land. They have New Orleans, which they have a port to bring in if they have to bring in troops or anything like that.
And now you're dealing with crazy-ass Napoleon.
Exactly. And basically, like, the president is looking at this and being like, I really don't like the fact that, like, because you're bringing in a huge army into San Domingue, what's now Haiti. Mm-hmm. If you need to just, like, reposition and send the rest of that army somewhere close that you've been having some issues or you maybe want to take over a little bit more, you just send them right over to New Orleans. So
maybe the French are still kind of angry about the 7 Years' War. Maybe.
well, and here's the thing too: is during that whole issue that they were having with Haiti when they were fighting for their fucking independence, the United States was kind of like, yeah, so we can't like lend you any money, France. We can't really support you in this and everything. We're kind of trying to get stuff settled here where, we've only been around for fucking 25 years. You know how it works.
New management.
Yeah. We're going to go ahead and just sit this out while at the same time allowing smuggling and backdoor funneling of supplies in to support the Haitian revolutionaries to take back their country. Because if they could get France out of there, they essentially wouldn't have this territory that they could then like launch an invasion from.
We've been funding guerrilla wars in other countries for so long.
And so there's this kind of fear that there might be some retaliation also if it's found out that we were sitting this one out or even kind of helping out the enemy. So kind of a big thing that was like, the Red Scare and all that kind of stuff. It even happened back then when it was like, what would you call the French scare? What color would that be? The light blue scare?
The beige scare?
The beige scare, the maroon scare.
The baguette scare?
Yeah, something like that.
The cigarette scare?
So this starts to kind of get the gears turning of how can we maybe make a deal to get France out of here?
Well, at the same time, we have like very little knowledge of this secret treaty that ceded New Orleans and Louisiana territory back to France from Spain. We're kind of hear rumblings of it. Thomas Jefferson has his ear to the ground, kind of trying to figure out what's going on. Ultimately, Napoleon's big plan when he sent Leclerc down to stop this rebellion in Haiti was he wanted to reestablish New Orleans and the Louisiana territory the same way. If Haiti makes us so much money and it's a small island, what can we do if we plant a bunch of sugarcane in Louisiana? Then we can bring it down to the island. From the island, it's an easier travel back to France. We're just going to make a shitload of money. Mm-hmm. So Napoleon's like, decided, Leclerc, go down there, fix the problem in Haiti. Once you fix the problem in Haiti, we already have this land deal up here where we're going to take back over our entire part of Louisiana territory. We're just going to make a ton of money. All of a sudden, once Haiti falls apart, he doesn't have that same desire for New Orleans anymore in Louisiana because there's nothing really that he can do with it from such a long way away.
He also lost like 12,000 troops.
Mm-hmm.
12,000.
Yeah, this is back at a time when populations are so laughably small that like 1,000 people is a big city. Mm-hmm. Like I think it took 50,000 people to declare statehood or some shit like that.
Yeah, you don't just pull. You're like, we lost 12,000. Okay, well, I'm going to send you guys 12,000 more to go ahead and take over the Louisiana territory, or go ahead and reinforce it.
Yeah,
I'm dealing with shit here.
Mm-hmm.
There's always shit happening in Europe. Britain's fucking waiting for the next fight to start.
Well, and during this whole ordeal, there was a relative peace, but Great Britain starts stomping its feet around when it hears this revolution happen, thinking, hey, maybe the French are a little bit weak. Mm-hmm. We need to see where this goes. So Jefferson, kind of knowing a little bit about this treaty, not knowing a whole lot about it, sees that it's going to be really, really important to get a hold of New Orleans. New Orleans is the crown jewel. New Orleans is the best case scenario for Thomas Jefferson, which is so funny with how this ends.
And with Thomas Jefferson, he has some, insider knowledge on kind of the goings about and working of how the French government is and things. He served as the ambassador to France before he was the president. So
which wouldn't surprise me that that's how he found out about the treaty.
Exactly. And so, once he becomes president, he knows kind of what the writing on the wall is. And he maybe knows what the temperature in Europe is and what may be leading up to maybe a little bit of conflict. And he's kind of smelling an opportunity to be like, okay, they're going to be preoccupied. They're going to need one thing if they're going to fight this war, and you need fucking money. Mm-hmm. So maybe we offer to go and buy New Orleans from him. Has no idea about the rest of the territory or anything like that. But he's like, if we can just get our hands on New Orleans, not only is that giving us that extremely, fucking, what am I trying to say?
Such a rich port city.
Yeah, such a rich port city. So much, money coming in there. also, if France tries to come into any other part of the how are they going to get to the other part of their territory? They're going to come back in through. They can't come back in through Canada. Are they going to try to come back in because we'll own New Orleans at that point?
Yeah, we own all ports of entry to anything that they need. Then eventually we can probably start to look towards that land. So Thomas Jefferson takes a swing in, I believe it was 1803, and he sends this guy who should have so much more fame. His name's Robert Livingston. Sends Robert Livingston to France to negotiate this deal. Thomas Jefferson must not have trusted a lot of people, because right after that, he actually speaks to a French friend living in America. Important name in the middle of this. You're going to probably catch it as soon as I say it. Pierre Samuel Dupont de Nemours. The famous Dupont family came from this gentleman. But he sends him back over to France as kind of like a back channel for negotiations. So he
was French, right?
Yeah.
So he's a French guy living in the United States. If the name DuPont sounds familiar, yes, this is essentially the predecessor
chemical company
of the DuPont Chemical Company. So, yep.
Pretty big deal that Thomas Jefferson's just sending over there as a back channel in the negotiations.
Well, I'm guessing it was probably going to be pretty fucking profitable for him.
Oh, yeah.
If the United States, if he has companies in the United States and they're going to try to expand, he's going to have more customers to,
Well, the United States owes him one.
Yeah.
Along with that, he starts sending letters to James Monroe, and Thomas Jefferson was quite the manipulator. He knew how to play people and to kind of play on their emotions, and he basically tells James Monroe that he has to do this for his country. Monroe is kind of burnt out on politics. He was actually the ambassador to France as well, but ended up getting recalled by Washington. He got his ass chewed. He kind of got made to be the scapegoat and kind of tried to plead his case in this weird, like, you didn't fire me, I quit letter. So along with that, he's trying to get a hold of Monroe. Livingston's over there working. And in order to finance this war with England and the loss of Haiti, Napoleon has some crazy ideas about what he wants to do.
And Livingston hadn't just been like sent over there at the same time as like DuPont was doing all this kind of stuff. He'd been sent as the minister of France for, I think it was since 1801. So he'd been over there a little bit, like, getting familiar with the goings on of the French government and kind of how that was all working.
And he signed the Declaration of Independence, didn't he? Or the...
He was one of the founding fathers, the 5 or 6 that drafted the Declaration of Independence. He was also the guy that swore in George Washington as the first president of the United States.
Pretty big deal.
How people don't know more about Robert Livingston. Robert R. Livingston, second R, also Robert Livingston.
The man with 2 same names. Livingston was over there under specific orders. He was sent over there with $10 million to buy New Orleans. That was what Jefferson said he wanted. That was the plan. That was a strategic move that he made. On April 11th, Napoleon gets this wild hair, and he's like, well, you want New Orleans. Why don't you just take the Louisiana territory and you give me $15 million and we'll call it good? And I'm sure Livingston's like, how much more space and territory is that? And he pulls up the map and he draws it out. He's like, that. He's like, oh, God, that's like the same size as what we have now.
Instantly gets hard. So,
Yeah.
One thing, too, I think they kind of saw as the writing on the wall here is you're going to start fighting Britain. You've been fighting them forever. The next one, you got Napoleon in there.
Mm-hmm. You're either fucking or fighting.
Exactly. And we all know what Napoleon meant. Hey, go back, listen to the Napoleon episode if you don't know what he was about. So
great guy.
He's got to be looking at this and saying, if they try to, if this war starts and when it starts and when I'm trying to take over Europe, because that was the priority. Napoleon kind of was like, why would I go after colonies when I can just take over fucking Europe here? This is all the land we know. I know all this area. I'm just going to take over everybody here and just have a big kingdom. And then maybe we'll worry about that one over there once we establish shit in Europe.
Well, what's a better place for a colony than just right across the English Channel?
Yeah.
So if you take over England, pretty big score.
So he understands also that because he's going to be committing all of his resources to this, as soon as this thing kicks off, all the United States has to do is be like, so they're busy doing that. They can't respond. We fucking beat Britain. So I'm pretty sure we can beat whatever French forces are left here, keeping the territory in New Orleans. It was a situation where Napoleon is like, if you don't sell this, they're just going to fucking take it. So we need to fucking probably sell it on the cheap. So we'll actually get something out of it. We need to try to get some money out of this. While Livingston is getting all of this shit together, Monroe's not even there.
No.
Because travel took so fucking long to get someplace. Yeah, Monroe being sent over in 1803, we end up getting to April 10th when Napoleon ends up telling I think it was his treasury minister or something like that.
Foreign minister, I think.
Well, he's talking to two guys. So the treasury minister is the one that ends up making the actual offer, and that was Francois Barbe Monbois. And so within a day of Napoleon being like, should we sell it? Literally the next day, Monbois is just like, Livingston, 15 million. And he's like, oh, I can only spend 10 millions on New Orleans. And he's like, oh, so I'm sorry. No. 15 million for all of it. And he's like, excuse me. As far as what the Louisiana Purchase actually got, let me just kind of list it out for states, because I don't feel like we're doing it justice, the amount of size for this. This area doubled the current size of the United States, which is from the East Coast all the way to the Mississippi River. At that time, it doubled the size. It includes parts of Louisiana, because parts of it are also part of the Mexico, right? Mm-hmm. That in Texas. So part of Louisiana, including New Orleans, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Iowa, Kansas, half of Colorado, Nebraska, South Dakota, part of Minnesota, half of North Dakota, 3/4 of Montana, 3/4 of Wyoming. Like 12 fucking states.
Well, and we're talking about a total space of 828,000 square miles. And it translates out into 530 million acres of territory, which put it, I think it was like between 3 and 4 cents an acre.
Yeah, 3 or 4 cents an acre. Even putting it in, when you list like a transaction back then, and then you list what it is in today's money, and you're like, holy shit. The one that you said about the indemnity payment or whatever it was. That today would still only be like $376 million. It doesn't even get close to what it is not. This is factual information. It is the largest transactional land deal, because when you were in ancient times and you conquered a place, that's not a land deal.
It's not a transaction.
Exactly. This has to be a transaction. It has been the largest land deal in human history. Again, land deal. And it has been, if you check any list of like the greatest deals of all time, it is the number one greatest deal of all time.
I would say it's that or Alaska. I feel like Alaska and them are kind of 1A, 1B for as much oil as we've pulled out of Alaska.
But still, you can't, just like we talked about earlier, you can't overstate the importance
huge.
Of getting that. We wouldn't be able to have Alaska had it not been for getting the Louisiana Purchase.
Yeah, and this whole deal, like we just said, April 10th, April 11th is when this whole thing gets pitched. April 30th, the Louisiana Purchase Treaty is signed. So that is when Monroe sweeps into town off the boat, and he's like, we need to negotiate this. I need a solid number. We're going to talk those frogs out of as much money as possible, or out of his getting this land as cheap as possible. And Livingston's like, oh, already did that. And he's like, what's the deal? And he tells me, for the Louisiana Territory, not just New Orleans? He's like, yeah, 15 million. He's like, okay, well, I probably need to make myself look more important than I am in this situation, and goes in and like tries to hammer out every single detail that he possibly can while this deal is already like in place. I believe the way that it was hammered out was we would take, I think it was a total of 800,000 silver francs at the time. It was 200,000 that was a like debt forgiveness to France that they had taken out with the United States, and then it was 600,000 as the actual payment for it that they made. It was actually financed, weirdly enough, through a bank in the Netherlands and a bank in England. So England paid France. So
Not England.
France,
At that point, it's a bank. It doesn't mean the
Yeah.
Bank of England. It could be. That's the whole point. Is when you hear about this, like England is probably looking at this bank, being like, "The fuck you doing?" It's like it's business, man. Do you know how much money we're gonna fucking make off this?
you guys are going to see some of this too.
Listen, don't be upset at us as the bank that you lost your fucking colonies. You had those things before. We didn't lose them. We need to make our fucking money.
Just be happy that we didn't go ahead and finance this in cannonballs like the French wanted.
Okay. So this deal ends up going through. The papers are signed. Monroe sweeps in. Livingston had it all. He did it like days before is when he got this deal. Then Monroe comes in and he's basically like, all right. He's like, oh, we're done? Okay. I'm going to still sign my name on this.
Yep.
Because
First.
I'm going to make sure my name is, and I'm going to make sure everybody fucking knows. Like when you look at the Declaration of Independence and you see John Hancock's name is fucking huge.
Uh-huh.
It's like, I'm going to make sure my signature is just bigger than yours and it's, in the first position. So everybody knows that I negotiated this deal. And that's why James Monroe is the one known to have basically put together Louisiana Purchase when in reality it was fucking Robert Livingston. All right. So we've got the land. Before we go any further, let's take a bathroom break.
Go.
Oh my God, Adam. What is that up in the sky? It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's socials. Oh my God. It's faster than Instagram.
That's historically high pod on Instagram.
More powerful than X.
It's historically high, historically HI on X.
Able to leap tall threads in a single bound.
Back to historically high pod on Threads.
And, I guess there's still Gmail, right?
We got that too. That is historically high podcast at gmail.com.
All right, guys, back to the show.
Well, in theory, yes. The paperwork was signed over in France. It was coming back to the United States. It was actually announced, hardy horror, on July 4th that this deal was going to end up coming back to the United States. It doesn't end up making it in front of D.C. until I believe it was July 11th.
They were fucking scared too.
Oh, yeah.
Because during that time frame of when it was agreed upon and when it actually got signed, they're like, this deal is too... They're going to fucking know. They're going to go like tell Napoleon or something like that, or they're going to have a night to sleep on it. They're like, no, what did we fucking agree to? No, we're not doing this. So there was kind of a rush to try to get it done as quickly as possible, just for fear that they were going to fucking smarten up and realize that they could have asked for so much more.
And back home, too, we come to a point where Jefferson has a lot of issues with this deal. Thomas Jefferson was a writer of the Constitution. And in that Constitution, there isn't a real explanation of the ability and the power for the executive branch to make a land deal and use government funds to purchase land. Like, it wasn't laid out in the Constitution. Him being a strict constitutionalist was like, well, I don't know if this is going to hold up because these Federalist bastards on the other side have caused me a lot of heartache and they're probably going to try to push through this.
Well, guess what you can do? When you're president, in the time frame that there are still a bunch of fucking people alive that actually wrote the Constitution, you can actually get answers, or you can ask people that helped wrote it what their intentions were by those words. And it was decided essentially that because it was something that helped the country and was essentially using governmental funds for the opportunity and the, future of prosperity that this would allow the country to have. And also it was like a national security type thing because you're kicking another country out of where you're living. He was able to pretty much justify it to himself, be like, okay, I guess because it doesn't state that I can't do that in the Constitution, I can justify due to these constitutional fucking
necessary and
terms and everything
clause.
that this is the purpose of acquiring this land.
He actually writes up constitutional amendments stating like that would give him the power to do this, and he brings it to his cabinet and his secretaries, and he shows them the amendment, and they read through it like, the fuck is this? What are you doing? And he's like, well, if we get this amendment passed before this comes over and before we have to sign this deal, then we'll have the power to do it and there won't be fight and discussion. And all the secretaries look at each other, they look at him, they go, well, is anybody against this? And he's like, well, no. He's like, then what are we doing here? Why did you write an amendment for something that could potentially never be an issue? If you don't bring it up, maybe they won't bring it up.
He was such a constitutionalist that he's like, no, like, we don't know when we're going to run into this again. Like, we need to make sure there's something. The stuff that we missed when we were all drafting this, there were situations that we couldn't foresee. So we're going to write some new shit based upon the parlance of our times, man.
Everybody else is still like, but it's not an issue yet. So why are you trying to put out that fire? He's like, oh, okay, well, maybe if I don't bring it up, maybe it'll be okay. And that's just like one side to this three-sided issue at home that he has.
Yeah, it wasn't a fucking home run.
No.
Everyone wasn't like, oh my God, we got all this fucking land and we got it on the cheap. There was a large, portion of people that were like, okay, we're looking at how this is actually going to work out. So in Congress, they were looking at it and being like, okay, well, these people that are in these states near the East Coast are mostly these types of people that side on our side for political matters. If people are expanding out to rural areas, having the creations of new states, those states are most likely going to be whatever the opposing party was. So there was that concern about them losing. Like,
free states and slave states.
Yeah, like losing their fucking political power despite the fact that the country just got a whole lot fucking bigger. The other concern that, and Thomas Jefferson had this concern, is when the Constitution was written, it was essentially written to govern, to be able to govern a republic of a certain size. Mm-hmm. And maybe it had certain things in it that would allow for growth of that republic, but there was a limit to the size of that and how effective the Constitution would be once a republic got to a certain size. Once it got to where people were too spread out from the power bases and that kind of stuff, you had more lawlessness. Like, look at the American West. Once all of this happens and people start traveling west, there's lawlessness out there.
Yeah.
And looking at that from that standpoint, he was kind of like, well, fuck, like, can the Republic only go so far before I lose control of this thing? It was a conversation even back then when the people who were fucking alive that wrote the Constitution could see writing on the wall and being like, yeah, oh, fuck, I don't know if how can you anticipate when those guys were writing that document down that just a few years later, you're going to double the fucking size of the country? Mm-hmm. The stuff that you wrote, the country wasn't even that big at that point. Then it got a little bit bigger over the Mississippi. Then all of a sudden it doubles again. You're like, so we are still supposed to use the same set of rules when the entire playing board has changed.
This is like the one thing that Thomas Jefferson and I see just fully, completely eye to eye on, because I think the United States is too big. I think that's part of our problem today, that the United States is too big, and we have too many states. Because even though we're all in this one big union together and everybody has their own opinion, states fight in amongst themselves, but like, you can't go to war because you're in the United States. Mm-hmm. So it all becomes this political chess match, and there's so many pawns out there to play with. If there was only like 20 states in the United States, I think shit would be a lot easier.
Yeah.
And there's just too many people for one, but if we had less states, I think it would be a lot easier to agree
less
on
people,
something.
Less states.
Yeah.
I'd vote for you running on that ticket.
But part of that issue is all these slave states that come to the South. Louisiana is a slave state, a little different. We'll talk about that in a second. But the more slave states you add, the more people you add. The North had a real big issue with this. And when we talk about like secession and the
Civil
War that happens, the South wasn't the first side to try to talk about seceding from the nation. And I think I kind of knew about that a little bit, but this sort of is very surprising to come across. But they looked at the situation, they go, well, the slave states in the South, if you add Louisiana as a state and those states grow and everywhere out of Louisiana territory, that's going to bring more slave states in. Those slave states are going to have larger populations because they have a bigger slave population. All the way back in 1787, this fight was happening before any of this happened, and they came up with something called the Three-Fifths Compromise. The Three-Fifths Compromise was put into place because the southern states were trying to classify slaves as people, which shouldn't have been something they had to classify, but they did it for like tax reasons.
They did it for their own reasons. They were trying to say, we treat this as property, But when it comes to how much you're going to tax us for, oh yeah, these are definitely all people.
Well,
They were only people as long as they were trying to use them to get a fucking discount.
that and then try to get representation in Congress.
The other thing, too, is when you have these slave states, kind of at this point before the Louisiana Purchase, is slavery was kind of contained because there was only so much land.
Yeah.
And because of that, they were working harder to kind of, it was easier to phase it out at that point.
Mm-hmm.
They were able to put more pressure, and like Adam said, it even got to the point where essentially what would be the Union during the Civil War, those states were thinking about like being like, let's do our own thing. The country was still so new, and it's, guys, 250 years, we're still fucking toddlers as far as like nations go and everything. But this was like infancy, like fresh out the womb.
Still shitting on our diapers.
Where the likelihood of this happening was much higher because it was still so new. And with this opening of the Louisiana Purchase and all of this territory, when they start moving into this new land and needing to build these huge farms and everything like that, the people that are doing that are going to be needing help, or basically a workforce to work all of that land. So now you've opened up this entirely new supply need for larger workforce. And now slavery is on the rise again. Or if this thing goes through, it's on the rise. It still has to go through Congress and be ratified.
During that whole time, everybody in the North was like, well, we got the 3/5 compromise. We didn't want them to count as anything because they don't look at them as anything but property. We compromised at 3/5, but if slave states grow faster than the northern territories that are free states grow, we're going to lose our power in Congress and we're just going to be screwed. Mm-hmm. So, if this was to go through without the assurances that the North got, they were talking about seceding from the Union, and we would have had like not necessarily a quasi-civil war, but like a sides-flip civil war where the Confederacy would have been the North and the Union would have been the South.
Well, from a standpoint of who's trying to secede.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just such an odd little twist and turn. But getting back to slavery in Louisiana, this was kind of this third prong that TJ had to work through, because slavery in Louisiana was just very similar to Haiti. The other problem was you had a bunch of different cultures that had moved into New Orleans, from South Americans, Africans, anywhere in the islands. You had French people. You had this just kind of an American melting pot before America became a melting pot. Mm-hmm. And that's not always going to be cool with the predominantly white rest of the United States.
Well, not when their thought was probably like, fine, we're going to kick him out of here and then we're going to be able to take that. Or he's like, oh, no. Thomas Jefferson's basically like, no, they're going to get citizenship. Like, we're going to keep these people here.
That's a part of the treaty. France made us right that they were going to maintain citizenship.
Have you ever been to New Orleans? These people are fucking crazy. Like, France doesn't want these people back. They're fucking nuts. So part of that is we're going to go in and keep these people, but fuck, they are good at what they do.
Well, how do you, as the South, you also have issues with this, because if you don't adopt good old American slavery, you're going to have people on your plantations, slaves on your plantations, hearing about the free black men that live in New Orleans because they were able to buy their freedom and they're running a shop in there. Mm-hmm. Women, pretty popular as shop owners, and we're given so much more power. What happens when the women hear about the female shop owners down in New Orleans? Of course, when they're sitting in the parlor, like, oh, that's the craziest thought ever. But in their heads, they're like, well, we can do this if they can do this. It's sort of a tough deal all the way around for what the American status quo was. So Jefferson gets a little creative, fills some different things out in the treaty where it says to all men. And keep in mind, this is the same guy that wrote in the Constitution, we believe these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equally. Mm-hmm. Changes the wording in the treaty to say that citizenship and freedom will be granted to all white Louisianians.
What he probably would have tried to get into the fucking Constitution had it not been for some other voices. And make no mistake, like, we're not Thomas Jefferson apologists here by any means. We're simply discussing his part in this. Thomas Jefferson was definitely not against fucking slavery, if you know anything about Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't. He had slaves. This is the complexity of Thomas Jefferson. He wasn't. He had slaves. had quite a few slave Thomas Jefferson children.
Multiple relations.
Yes. But at the same time, he didn't like slavery. He wanted to phase out slavery. And again, this is sort of some backfill on a U.S. president where you're going to say good things. He couldn't have hated slavery that much because he did own slaves. But at the same time, he kind of wanted to see the practice end. I think when he died, he maybe gave all of his slaves freedom. Something along those lines. But he was still an active slave owner while being against it and was hoping that it would phase out. Well, when the cotton gin becomes a thing later on and we see the cotton boom, it completely changes the game. But eventually, he quells enough people's concerns down. October 20th, they're running up against a wall because it was the end of October that this had to be ratified for it to go into effect. And they're hearing some rumblings from France that maybe Napoleon's getting some cold feet and wants to pull the deal. I'm sure the only cold feet Napoleon's getting is not being able to get his money to go up and just start beating some Brits' heads in.
Yeah.
So he was always going to let this deal go through, I'm sure. It gets ratified October 20th with a 24-7 vote. So you
not
still
that
had
close. Yeah.
You still had 7 dissenters, though. That's a pretty big deal. Out of 31, 7 people saying no is not nothing. October 21st, they're given the authorization for Thomas Jefferson to take control of the territory. And again, this was 1803 that this all happens. December 20th, again, like Chris said, there's some time and lag in order to get all this stuff done. December 20th, 1803, there is the transfer from France to the United States, which took place 3 weeks after Spain transferred the Louisiana
That's how
Purchase
fucking
to France.
fast all of this came together. Basically, when Napoleon took back France, or took back the Louisiana territory, it was totally thought to be like, yeah, we're getting ready to fucking sell this shit. We just need to get it back in our possession. And didn't, of course, mention it to Spain. Spain sees them selling it. It's probably like, what the fuck, man? Like,
They go to hand them the French flags for the transition ceremony up the flagpoles. Like, wait, this is an American flag. Yeah, no, we sold it.
we're good.
Yeah, don't even fly our flag up. We're good.
So that's when it was transferred from Spain to France. Yeah, it took 3 weeks. And the thing about this is it's okay. So it's not that complicated. This land was not really France's to give away. This was the land in which France had. So the whole thing with what they were to consider their colonial territory, I guess, in the eyes of the civilized world at that point, you could claim a colonial territory as long as the populace was not Christian. That's the only fucking qualification. They just haven't heard of your God. And so because of that, it was recognized that France had this territory because the Native Americans weren't Christian. And when we got this land, basically what this was is it wasn't their transfer of possession of the land. It's like we had first dibs on the land is what it was. There would not be any type of international, objection were we to go ahead and take this land. It would be recognized by the rest of the world. So it's not acquiring the land, it's acquiring the rights to the land, I guess is what it would be.
It's like a draft pick that stays overseas and plays in the EuroLeague, but you have the rights to his contract.
So that's how these fucking countries are able to claim land. It's just the fucking populace that's there doesn't believe in fucking Jesus.
Very, very weird.
And so, of course, because the early American government, Christian nation, whatever, they're just like, yeah, we recognize the same shit too. We're just going to go ahead and have this land. So what do you do once you now have this huge new chunk of land? You got to fucking go exploring, right?
Yeah. It was broken up into 2 areas. There was the territory of Orleans, which is basically like the 33rd parallel and below. Almost what Louisiana is now was the territory of Orleans. It got a little smaller. I think Arkansas took some chunks out of it. And then Upper Louisiana, which was everything above all the way up to some silly like John's Land or Rouland's Land, some goofy Canadian thing.
Do you think that there was something within the treaty that it had to be kept as the Louisiana Territory, the name?
I just think that that's what it was. I think it's like when you get a rescue dog and you don't change his name because they won't know what to come to.
That makes sense. And at that point, New York was already huge. Like, no one's going to be like, oh, we beat the British and now we get to rename fucking everything. Okay.
Yeah, no more
sense.
news. Part of this was supposed to answer a problem that Thomas Jefferson had with the Native American population. Now that you have this big Louisiana territory and you have all this room, if you can somehow convince the Native Americans to leave this tribal family land that they've lived on for generations and hundreds of years and had so much history with and found sacred, if you could talk them out of that land and say, hey, there's a bunch of stuff on the other side of the river. I don't know what's over there, but it's probably something cool.
Hey, have you guys went west? Have you guys went further west? I think it's probably really nice further west. Why don't you guys just pack up all your shit and head further west?
You get the Native Americans to give up their land rights and head over to the west side of the United States. All of a sudden, there's way more land that's open that you can go ahead and take over instead of what eventually happens to the situation. We'll talk about that.
In all the East Coast cities, everyone's like, all right, everyone, get the fuck out of here. Head west. Land. It's like, I wonder if, do you remember the movie Far and Away? It's I want to say it's one of the, like, there's 2 or 3 movies where Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise made together, but it's the one that they all have to wait at like this weird starting line. Like the end scene of it, it's like where they're trying to homestead and like claim their territory with like their flag. And they have this huge swath of territory and you have to like write out and get the flag off the territory and plant your own. And then that's your land. I imagine it being like that, like Louisiana's fucking open.
Yeah. And then they start running into like Creole people. I'm like, who are you?
Fucking Cajun people. And
What's
people
going
down in
on
the swamp
down
being
here?
like, fuck. You guys been here this entire time?
Why don't you speak better English?
I don't know.
But at the same time, it could be the answer. And that was hopefully what Thomas Jefferson wanted, was if you can move the Native American populations, then you have more land over there and you can continue spreading.
Was the thought process on that because now there was like some type of fucking paperwork that said they had the rights to the land, that there wouldn't be an objection to it? The difference was being like, we paid for this land. Well, and he's like, we didn't see any money.
Yeah.
Like, well, the land technically wasn't yours. Apparently France had it. They're like, the fur trapping people that talk weird.
The ones that got here 800 years after we were.
Yeah, like those people, no, they didn't fucking own this either. Like, well, they think they did because they think they owned it. They sold it to us. Listen, we already paid them. So, like, it's our land. So just west.
Skedaddle.
Go west.
Prior to this takeover, in 1803, while this was all coming together, Jefferson commissioned our old buddy Meriwether Lewis to form an expedition to explore and detail all of the new territory and then find this water travel route across the west, the Northwest Passage. And his just blind confidence in being like, we're going to get this deal done. Meriwether Lewis, pretty important guy in my life, really like him. I'm going to get him on board. We're going to get him staged. As soon as we get this land, I think it was like a matter of weeks after the transfer, the Lewis and Clark expedition's off.
I feel like it's one of those things where they're already waiting because they left out of St. Louis, right?
Yep.
So they were already in an area. St. Louis, king of fucking France, they're already, and I think they were across the river on the American side, right? Across from, because they were going up the Missouri.
Yeah.
So I can't remember what the name of the fort was. This is what happens when you do so many episodes, is the information just gets pushed out the back of your brain. But the fort that they were at was kind of across the river from St. Louis. And as soon as I feel like it's one of the movies where they send the fucking flare up for the signal.
Yeah.
Or like on Lord of the Rings where they light all the fires. As soon as the treaty was passed by Congress, they just lit the fires in the Appalachian Mountains and it just traveled. And Lewis and Clark fucking took off in the boats. Like, go, go, go.
Yeah, how do you get that planned? Because St. Louis is the capital of the Upper Territory. New Orleans is the capital of Southern Territory. You just agree that, like, at sunrise is when...
On sunrise of the 5th day.
Yeah, that's when the transition happens. Second part of this expedition was to establish these positive relations with the Native Americans. Listen back to the episode. It's actually sneaky, one of my favorites. I really did enjoy that episode a lot. Find out all the shenanigans, the hijinks, find out about little Bumpy and Sacagawea, however we pronounced it back then was the correct way. And just a very fun American story of them kind of meeting these Native American tribes, and sometimes it went good, sometimes it went pretty bad. It all ends up with Meriwether Lewis getting shot in the ass by accident. Hell of an episode.
The fact that this expedition even worked is fucking nuts. Like,
Yeah.
go back, listen to the episode. It's insane. This thing should have failed, 100 years or 100 miles upriver, but somehow it didn't. When we say establish positive relations with the Native Americans, basically what it was is coming into their camp and being like, hey, do you guys know you're part of the United States now? It's like, hey, do you mind if we talk to you for a second about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ?
Thomas
it was
Jefferson.
Yes, it was the fucking government equivalent of that. It's like, so just letting you guys know you're now living in the United States. They're like, the fuck is the United States? It's like, well, we kind of own this land, so we're just going to kind of, if you see some of us coming by, it's cool. We're living here now, but we brought you these like medals and everything to show you that what the Great Father, basically what they called whoever, Thomas Jefferson at the time.
Yep.
And they're like, yeah, the Great Father is going to be looking out for you guys. And then they would do that as they were heading up the fucking Missouri River to these tribes. They were also mapping these entire areas. And there were also other expeditions that were sent out like into the Louisiana Territory without the intention of going all the way and finding a Northwest Passage. It was just basically to scout the area and find out basically what they had. Like Thomas Jefferson was really on the ball with like, okay, we need to find out exactly what we bought and how much territory. He's like, and also, if people don't know exactly how much we bought, just keep going until they tell us, hey, that's far enough. Mm-hmm. And they, at one point, didn't they even keep going north and a little more north? It was like when they were like kicking the ball a little bit further. It's like, quit kicking the ball.
Yeah. Yeah, that was part of this guy named Pike's expedition. We'll talk about him. I love the fact that, and I don't think we mentioned it, we probably did during the episode, but going and making these connections with these tribes and everything like that, Thomas Jefferson sent them with extra cannons because he believed that there was a chance they would run into, like, woolly mammoths.
He had no fucking clue,
Creatures that had been extinct for tens of thousands of years. He's like, you might run into it. Maybe take this.
At the same time, think of the stories come back from, like, fur trappers about grizzly bears and moose and all this nut stuff. And it's 2/3 of the country that hasn't even been discovered. And when you look at have you ever seen a topographical map of the States?
Yeah.
How the fucking West Coast is so high, like in the Rocky Mountains, and then it dips way down. Like, do you just assume that the rest of the country just kind of looks exactly like this? Because it goes up fast. It's like, it's so fucking hilly here.
Well, yeah, it's the Appalachians and the Smoky Mountains. Like, those are mountains. And then they got over like, those, what the fuck is that? That's not a mountain.
They got to the Rockies and they're like, the fuck is this?
The other part that I love about it was since the French had gone through and trapped and had interactions with these Native Americans, when Meriwether Lewis would come in and give his speech, he'd be like, the Great Father will provide you as many beads as possible. Here is this. Here is food from our country. Here is what the Great Father can provide. And the Native Americans are like, you guys know the French, right? Like, yeah. No. We kicked them out. That's how we got this land. Like, okay. When the French came through, they gave us whiskey, they gave us guns, and they gave us gunpowder. We don't need beads. Can we get some more of that whiskey, guns, and gunpowder? He's like, we don't have any of that to spare. I was given a list of things that I can give you and I can't give you.
Well, that seems dangerous for us to be providing you those. You know what? I'll make you a deal. How about you give us all the stuff that the French gave you, and we'll give you like other stuff, like shovels and axes to till the land and grow your own food.
Can you smoke a shovel? No? Okay, never mind. Don't need that. Back in this Louisiana territory, to end kind of Lewis's part of this, he comes back and he's actually made governor of the Northern Territory. That's his job when he comes back.
Oh, that's right.
His other job is to kind of condense their memoirs that they made. Has a short stay as governor in the territory. Prior to that, the governorship was a guy named James Wilkinson. James Wilkinson is endlessly interesting to me because he is just a wild guy. He was the governor. He was also the senior officer of the United States Army. That's going to be a pretty important part when we talk about this. He struck up a friendship with a guy named Aaron Burr. Now, Aaron Burr challenged Thomas Jefferson for his first 4 years in office.
As part of the same party. So in his, what we would consider in the primaries.
Yep. They go ahead and they vote. Back then, the way that they did it was there was the Republican Party and the Federalist Party.
Mm-hmm.
What would happen, top vote getter ends up getting the presidency. The next in line, who was always the opposite, gets the vice presidency. Mm-hmm. They end up going through elections, and Burr and Thomas Jefferson tie. So they both beat the Republican out. They're like, well, we got to figure this out. Who's going to be president? Who's not going to be president? Instead of Burr just stepping out because Jefferson was more the face of the party, Burr's like, let's keep voting. They voted, and they voted, and they voted, and they voted, and it was just always a tie. They could never get it figured out. So finally they decide, after one final vote, that Jefferson wins. Jefferson becomes president. Burr becomes vice president. Burr's pissed about this.
Well, Burr doesn't become vice president because he's in the same party.
But he had actually switched parties in order to face him.
So basically, in order to, once he found out that he wasn't going to be able to be president, and at that point, since he's not going to be president, can't be vice president because it's within the same party, he then switches over to the other side and getting more votes than the guy that was running for president on the other side, if so facto, somehow becomes the vice president.
And when this happens, of course, Jefferson's not going to be too happy about this guy holding up his presidency, trying to become president himself. So he just basically sidelines Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr ends up running for, I believe it was governor of New York, while he was still vice president. And a little fella in United States history named Alexander Hamilton. That was tough. I talked him up and then almost forgot his name. I wanted to go Andrew Johnson. But Alexander Hamilton starts calling him on some of his bullshit and about some of the things that he did and the fact that he shouldn't be going for the governorship as vice president and he was ineffective. Burr goes ahead and gets angry about that and challenges him to a duel because he ended up losing the governorship and he thought it was because of Hamilton's doing. In this duel, I've never seen the play Hamilton. I've heard it's electric. Not much of a play guy. I'm sure Lin-Manuel Miranda does a real good job in this. But Burr and Hamilton go into this duel. Hamilton fires up. They said intentionally, maybe.
As a goddamn civilized gentleman.
Yeah. Burr, less civilized, hits him in the stomach and ends up killing Alexander Hamilton the next day.
Not so courteous.
Now, back in the less civilized United States, when you challenged somebody to a duel and it was accepted, if you shot somebody and killed somebody, you weren't ever held liable for it. This, unfortunately, was Alexander Hamilton, so Burr started to catch some flack for this.
Why do you agree to this if you're Hamilton? We'll find out probably during the Hamilton episode, but just looking at this from a fly-on-the-wall perspective, why do you fucking accept this? If you know for a fact that, what's going to be the result of the duel if both of you fire over each other's heads, then you're somehow right back to it.
Yeah, well, and
I don't want to say Hamilton may have just been a horrible shot, but maybe he was.
He could have been.
God damn it.
He absolutely could have been. Maybe he wasn't wearing his monocle that day or something.
His fucking powdered wig got down into his eyes. He's like, God damn it.
Just shot up in the air. Burr ends up kind of becoming a pariah. He's pushed on the outs, never really found his footing after that, until he ran into a guy named James Wilkinson. And James Wilkinson, again, the governor of the Northern Territory, he was a Spanish spy. Now, we didn't find out about this until years after he was dead, that he was actually a Spanish spy, but he was the the senior officer of the U.S. Army as a Spanish spy. Pretty crazy that happened. Him having sentiments towards the Spanish crown meets up with Aaron Burr.
When you say sentiments, do you mean money?
Yeah, I mean, when Spain was over here and he was in New Orleans, he claimed or paid homage to the Spanish king.
Okay.
So he was already kind of like a sleeper cell once they took over.
Spy is a pretty broad word with a broad definition because he could have been I'm not Spanish or by any means, but I'll provide you information and I'll do what I can for you in the Northwest and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
In exchange for so definitely be considered a spy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So him and Burr, a brash kind of shitty gentleman, whereas Wilkinson was a pretty clean cut guy. Hard to see them as friends. They end up becoming quite close. Burr finds out that Wilkinson has these connections in Spain, and Burr hatches this plan to take a chunk of the Louisiana territory and part of Spain and create this new land that Aaron Burr would be king of. Is kind of like a, hey, fuck you, Jefferson. I took something that was yours. You took something that was mine as the presidency. And Burr starts out on this little tour, kind of traveling around the United States, and ends up hooking up with the Tennessee militia leader named Andrew Jackson. He also ends up...
is that president?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Future president, Andrew Jackson, correct?
He also kind of gets in bed with this Irish millionaire named Harmon Blennerhassett, and stations himself on the island. That's kind of their base. These are two guys who are sympathetic to his cause, wouldn't mind helping him out just in case anything happened. And Burr goes around kind of trying to bully his way into the Spanish land, and Wilkinson starts to feel the heat because not only is he hearing from the Spanish crown about Burr poking around in Spanish territory, he's also pretty concerned because he's helping Burr get in contact with these consults back in Britain, or back in France, who he reached out to, and then back in Spain, who he reached out to. And so Wilkinson finally is like, this is getting too close to me. I got to pull the trigger on this one. And goes ahead and tells the guy in Spain Burr's ultimate plans, and goes ahead and tells Thomas Jefferson what Burr is doing. That Burr is this secret agent that's trying to take over this land. Once Jefferson finds out about it, he immediately calls for Burr to be arrested so he can stand trial in this situation.
Finally, we got the fucker.
Yeah, we're going to knock him out. Once Wilkinson turns state's evidence, basically, on Burr and spills the story, Burr finally gets arrested, and in every court that Burr was in, he was always found, he's never found, guilty. But the only reason that he wasn't ever found guilty was because he hadn't actually done anything yet. It was all preparations. At the same time, you have these witnesses that are coming up.
There was no intent. You couldn't charge someone with the intent to do something.
It wasn't like conspiracy at this point.
Because you've been too inept to actually do this, but you're trying to... We can't arrest you on this.
Yeah. So, Burr ends up somehow getting off scot-free while trying to make all this happen. Part of Wilkinson's command was this guy named Zebulon Pike. Zebulon Pike explored all of the new territory. Pikes Peak, that's in Colorado, is named after Zebulon. It was on one of his trips. He ended up taking a few different explorations out. He explored the northern Mississippi River, which is what you were talking about when he kind of starts creeping his way up into Canada before I think they found the border agreement in like 1818.
Because, if you ever look at the border for Canada, with the exception of like around the Great Lakes, and then once you get to like the east, kind of the northeast, it's like a fucking straight line.
Pretty flat.
So it's literally just a drawn, recognized border.
Yeah. That was 1805 to 1806. Immediately following that, 1806, 1807, he explores the southwest to the fringes of the Spanish colonial settlements in Texas and New Mexico. He's actually arrested by Spanish officials in, I believe it was Chihuahua, kind of down around Texas. And he was able to get like a pretty good read of the Spanish government and how things were, and how kind of starts maybe planting the seeds for this Mexican secession away from Spain. He comes back and does all his reporting to Wilkinson. Thomas Jefferson didn't know about Wilkinson's plans for Zebulon until Zebulon was already out there. And he's like, well, what's your guy doing? He's like, he's just out there exploring the northern part of the Mississippi River. I'm
doing my job. I'm mapping the area.
You guys tried to send Lewis and Clark on this trip, and they brought back a lot of stuff. So why can't I send Zebulon out there to make his finds? And it all kind of seems pretty beneficial. And then you find out years after Wilkinson died that he was a spy for the Spanish kingdom. Like, that's pretty interesting to know that we had such an embedded spy in the United States that nobody had any idea of until they like went over his papers and saw all of these different things.
Followed the paper trail.
Yeah, man. Could not believe it.
So being around like 1807, stuff between the British aren't happy about the 1776, snafu on their end.
Yep.
And so there still has been tensions, especially after we got this land from France, got, this additional huge swath of territory. We're making beneficial trades with France because this deal's gone off, without a hitch and everything. So the British the Royal Navy starts to kind of like ramp up the enforcement, like tighter restrictions on American trade with France. And because that's kind of hurting us in our pockets, this actually ends up leading to the War of 1812. And the War of 1812 was actually, there was, I think, a Battle of New Orleans, where the British had actually tried to take back New Orleans. And did you ever hear the song in high school? I think it was like 1814, we took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi.
No.
You never heard that? We were forced to fucking sing that song in like 7th grade history. There's a tape, like if you ever look up that song, look up the song Battle of New Orleans, and you won't be able to get it out of your fucking head for the rest of your life.
I think
actually don't listen to it.
Good.
But yeah, so I mean, we're already at that point too, right after kind of getting the territory, we're having to defend it already.
Oh yeah. So much of that is just really what. As soon as you acquired something, it was still kind of new enough that it felt like it was just up for grabs. Like if there was a war, somebody was going to try to go after your new stuff.
Maybe Britain just kind of figured out that they had recharged the war batteries. And they're like, okay, we had enough time to build the ships and build our forces back up. Okay, who can we try to attack? Which we take back?
They had already taken down Napoleon. They were pretty confident.
Yeah, that's true.
They were coming
multiple
off
times.
Yeah, a war boner at that point that they just needed to let
They
out. They
finally also were like, fuck, finally we can like look away from Europe and look elsewhere.
Along with that, we get something called the Treaty of Adams-Onis. Treaty of Adams-Onis, I believe, was John Quincy Adams that had signed this in 1819. Part of the deal that we had forgot to mention earlier on, and I'm sure if you know this story, you were probably like, you missed something. We end up getting a hold of Western and Eastern Florida. Western Florida was basically like all of the land that connected the Gulf of Mexico to the United States. Mm-hmm. It was like Spain still had a little bit of a border there.
They just had a little strip.
Yeah, and when we went over to France, we asked for it. Like, oof, actually, that secret treaty that we signed, Florida wasn't a part of that. Yeah. Spain still owns that.
Here's the thing, too, is because Spain owns that, it kind of it doesn't make New Orleans useless, but it limits its value as like a trade hub, like immensely, because guess what? The Spanish can still intercede and intercept ships and everything like that, especially if you have to sail by their territory in Florida to try to get to New Orleans. So we still have a fucking tenant living in the country. We still haven't kicked out the last squatter at this point. And so, yeah, Florida still isn't ours. Well, part of it.
And Spain was more than willing to give it up. They didn't really have a lot going on.
I think at that point, too, after the French were gone as well, and it was just all the United States, and they're like, all the eyes are just on them. As soon as we got the French out, because they had so much territory, we kind of looked around and we're like, so what else does somebody else own here?
How can we clear the board?
Yeah, we looked down, and it's this little area, and the Spanish are just like, yeah, nothing to see here.
This is the Billy Madison when he looks at the kid with the snack pack and he goes, you know how bad I could beat you, right? The kid's just like, yeah.
Yep. He's like,
he hands him over the snack pack.
He's like, so yeah, I guess we'll sign this treaty and you guys will give us maybe some beneficial trade agreements or some shit like that.
Yeah. All in total, like Chris said earlier, 15 states are either formed or parts of them are formed or with the Louisiana Territory. Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, parts of Minnesota, parts of New Mexico, Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado.
Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California are all part of the Spanish territory at this point. So if you think about it, everything up to the Rocky Mountains, that's kind of what the divider was. It was the Rocky Mountains.
Just so much land. And for all of Jefferson's attempts to kind of quell this issue of slavery, we roll right into kind of the primer of the Civil War and stuff that we mentioned at the beginning of the Civil War episode. Once you finish this, if you haven't heard that one, go listen to that one because it just kind of rolls right up into it. 1820, there's something called the Missouri Compromise. In order for Missouri to become a state, we had to go ahead and sign a deal that for every slave state that was added to the United States, there would be a free state as well. So with Missouri getting in as a slave state, Maine is admitted as a free state. 1830, that guy Andrew Jackson pops back up and goes ahead and finishes Thomas Jefferson's questions about the Native Americans, and he creates the Indian Removal Act that said they were purchasing lands from the Native Americans east of the Mississippi to move them to the west of the river. This is where we get the Trail of Tears. Just a very tough episode that's going to be the Trail of Tears, but a pretty concerning issue. Kansas-Nebraska Act that happens in 1854 basically repealed the Missouri Compromise by giving the states power of something called popular sovereignty to determine if slavery would be allowed. So they were given their own self-determination to figure that slavery would be allowed. And it was so much of the fact that slavery had seen this rise because you had all this extra land that you could now cultivate, and it wasn't just these original states that had slavery. You had these new states coming on board, which then meant that you had new customers to be purchasing people to run their land. It just is such a, I don't know, if things were going out of style slavery-wise before the Louisiana Purchase, it was like as soon as the Louisiana Purchase happened, slavery just ramped right back up because there was so much potential to be had.
I'm trying to look up here as well when we acquired the western states.
I believe the western states were later on.
Oh, they were later on because we had to acquire them from Spain. But it did make mention of the Treaty of Adam Onis as part of that some of that land, because it's owned by Spain, that area, but not only was that area of Florida owned by Spain, technically that area in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California was still all owned by Spain as well.
I believe it was owned by Mexico at that time.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
okay.
Because I think Mexico had gained their independence from Spain kind of 1820s, 1830s maybe, something like that. So I think it might have been Mexican territory at that point, which just shows that Spain really didn't have any more holdings in that part of the world, if that's what it was, because if Mexico went ahead and had their independence, there wasn't a whole lot of reason for them to be over here.
Yeah, so in 1845, just to kind of go along with the theme of like how the country was actually fully formed now that we had all this, pretty much once we started heading west, it was just like, fuck it, let's just keep going. We know where the ocean is. Maybe we can just take all of it.
Pedal to the metal. If we get more people in there, they can't deny us.
Pretty much. So like 1845, that's when the United States annexed Texas, which had declared its independence from Mexico. Basically, that was the 2-year war between the United States and Mexico that ended in the American victory in 1848. And then the resulting peace treaty gave the United States control of that area extending all the way. So between 1803, when we acquired the Louisiana Territory, and 1848, we acquired the rest of the... That's fucking nuts, man. How do you expand that fast? Like,
well, and then I think the Northwest was shortly after that, because that was just, if we put enough people there, we have a claim to it.
Wasn't that owned by, like, Britain? That was owned by someone else weird, right?
I think it was Britain, yeah.
Okay.
But to say that the Louisiana Purchase wasn't the biggest thing I think that happened to the United States besides becoming their own independent nation is, I mean, there's just, I can't think of a number two.
Well, I mean, we can sit here and, play what if all day, but some of the biggest ones that kind of pop into my head are, this is in the 1800s and everything. If we don't have that, area to spread out, and if another country comes in there, then we get into a civil war to some degree, like actually happened. What's going to happen after we beat the shit out of each other? One side is going to be victorious, but what's going to stop that other country from being like, you're all fucking weak now, and just take us over? So we could be an entirely different, under a completely different nation.
Well, and every one of those potential neighbors that we could have had, we had conflict with already. So we're not getting like a new neighbor that we're friendly with. There's always those old tensions.
Well, here's the other thing too. You can only support so much of a populace in that specific area. Again, the country grows by almost 2/3 when we acquired the rest of the nation. If war does end up happening like a global conflict, we don't have the resources, we don't have the manpower, the populace, the manufacturing. We don't have anything like that to the degree like we do have to step into those roles to try to end a conflict like that.
Yeah, we don't have the whole West Coast. We're just launching shit out of Mississippi down the Mississippi River.
Yeah. We don't have access. Yeah, we don't have access to the fucking. We got to go all the way around South America just to respond to anything on the West Coast.
Yeah, it's just, it would have been completely impossible to do the things the United States has done without it.
It's, after looking into this, it's funny that this gets condensed down basically as an act in American history of just being like, so France had this chunk of land and we bought it from them and it doubled the size of America, and then that's how it happened. And it's just like, it leaves so much shit unanswered for such like a monumental and like pivotal moment of just being like, okay, well, how the fuck did they have it in the first place? Mm-hmm. What did it take for us to get it? Because how were we able to basically rip off the fucking French? Like, explain how this all came together. And basically what it is, it's a combination of France never stopping fucking fighting anybody. And at one point they were just low on a little bit of funds, knew they couldn't defend the area, and were like, okay, I guess we'll sell it to them. Like, dude, does that technically mean we owe the British the acquisition? Like, did they inadvertently actually help us in getting that land? And then they were just like, fuck, they sold what? Well, they needed money to fight us. God damn it.
I think a huge part of it is the United States and the American Revolution wasn't one country fighting another country. It was one colony fighting another country.
Yeah.
So regardless of us beating them and becoming free, it was like, oh, we had you for a while.
Yeah.
You're still pretty British. We still have the same accent. That hasn't
You got
changed.
lucky that one time. There's no way. We underestimated you. There's no way if we come back in to invade you within the next 40 years that you guys are going to be able to beat us. We're going to be so much more ready.
And then it never really happens. It never comes to fruition. And we were supercharged enough to be able to fight back against the British, but there's just the friendships run so deep and so shallow with the United States, France, and Britain. And you kind of forget about Spain because the Spanish Empire fell and it was just kind of the three great powers for a long time after that. But as far as being the Western powers, we've certainly had a lot of quarrels inside of the Western powers.
No shit. There's been a lot of fucking fighting within our own country. Like, and again, not that fucking long ago, man.
No.
At, when the War of 1812, what is that, 212 years ago, we actually had fighting here in this land against foreign powers.
You don't really think anything prior to the Civil War. You kind of think it was American Revolution and then Civil War that happened, but there was so much more before that.
And then again, once you acquire all this land, like there are again negative things that happened out of this. Slavery ramps back up, the invention of the cotton gin, there's all this new land to grow all this other shit on. We get into the Civil War. I don't know if it was bound to happen had we not expanded or not. I think it probably would have happened to some degree. But, I mean, this has its pros and its cons. But when it all boils down to it, yeah, I think this is... Man, I don't know where you go back to aside from 1776 Declaration of Independence as a pivotal moment of being like, this established us as like a major player.
And it was just a come up by happenstance.
Yeah, pure fucking luck, basically.
You could have taken it over eventually, probably. France would have been kind of busy had they not made it all the way over. If you hadn't purchased it, you probably could have chipped away at it and taken it, but the manpower and life and time that would have taken would have been so much more.
But then you're fighting France.
Yep.
France is going to come back at some point, feeling slighted and being like, how dare you take our place?
It would have been so different to gain all this.
Very fascinating topic. Not enough of it is covered in standard learning, which is why we cover it here at the Institution of Higher Learning.
Yeah, it's important to know Livingston's name. Monroe whitewashed Livingston's name for the paperwork, it feels like.
Fucking Monroe. All right, man. You got any final thoughts on this one?
No, not a lot of fun to get back to the United States, though.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us on another episode, and we'll catch you next week.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is historically high pod, historically high pod, and we are on Twitter at historically high. That's historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.